Hi everybody, this is Jacob's Guitar Channel, and today I'm going to talk about the sound of George Harrison's guitar solo on the Let It Be single. The Let It Be single is a very iconic guitar solo by George Harrison because he produces a very special sound he's become famous for, and I want to show how to reenact that sound using the Line 6 Helix. Before I want to do that, I want to talk shortly about the guitar sound on the solo, and I'm going to start off by telling you what I won't do in this video. I'm not going to explain the sound George has got on the Let It Be album. Because on the Let It Be album, there's a different guitar solo to the single, the reason being that the Let It Be album was produced by Phil Spector, and he had George re-record the solo, which was already released as a single, the single being produced by George Martin, which was the, normal producer of the Beatles. And you can find the version in question, for example, on the Blue album, which features the Beatles singles from 1976 to 1970. And I'm going to specifically talk about the solo on Let It Be, the single version, which is different. And how far is it different? On the Let It Be album, George uses a classic setup. He's going into a fuzzbox, and from the fuzzbox he's going into an amplifier. And he didn't do that for the single. For the single, George used a Leslie 145 cabinet, which is not a normal guitar amp, which is an amplifier associated with Hammond organs. A Leslie is an amplifier and a cabinet with a very special setup. It features a 40 watts tube amp, and you feed the signal into that amp, and after being run through that amp, the signal is being split up by frequency at a point of 800 Hertz, and all the frequencies over 800 Hertz are then directed through a horn, and the horn rotates. The frequencies below 800 Hertz are being fed into a woofer, and below the woofer there's a drum which rotates also, and the straight plane of the drum deflects the sound coming from the woofer, and it is being reflected in all sorts of directions depending on the rotation of the drum. So Leslie basically works with the Doppler effect, and it produces a modulation sound, a very special modulation sound, which has become quite iconic for George Harrison because he used it on some recordings in the 1960s which have become famous. He used it on the Let It Be single, and he also used it when he guested on Cream's Badge. And there are some other guitar solos George has played through the Leslie, mostly on Beatles records. He really liked that sort of effect and employed it quite a few times. Okay, before we delve into HX Edit, and I'm going to show you how to reenact that sound using today's equipment, I have to talk shortly about the guitar, which I'm going to be using in this video. I'm going to use a Godin Icon convertible. George Harrison used a Telecaster, and I don't have a Telecaster, so, I'm going to use this guitar here. Because this guitar features a very flexible pickup configuration. These are Seymour Duncan P rails, and you can employ them in 3 different modes. You can employ them as a normal humbucker, you can employ them as a P90, and you can employ them as a single coil, which is a blade single coil. You can see that here. I've selected the bridge pickup in single coil mode to come close to the sound a Telecaster would produce. Of course, this guitar is made from mahogany, and a Telecaster isn't and everything, but I don't have a Telecaster, so I'm using that one to come close to the original sound. Another point is if you operate the P rails in single coil mode, the output drops dramatically. So this guitar has got a very low output if you select single coil mode on the pickups. If you use the patch I've created, and you've got a real Telecaster or a guitar even with a bigger output like a Les Paul or something, you have to lower some levels because everything will be distorted otherwise. I'm going to show that in HX Edit later on, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to move over to HX Edit, and I'm going to explain how to set up the actual sound. Okay, here we are in HXEdit, and I'm going to explain step by step how I built the patch, which is basically George Harrison's sound on the Let It Be single. We're going to start out with the most important part of it, with the most important ingredient, so to say, which is the Leslie itself. And you find the original Leslie George used on the recording modeled in the Helix, and you find there under modulation, stereo, and then you have the 145 or 145 rotary. This is actually the model of the very Leslie George used to make the recording. And you can adjust some more parameters than you can on the original Leslie. Yeah, and I just listened to the recording and tried to, well, set them right by comparing my guitar sound to the one George has got on the Let It Be single. I know, because I read books about it, that George liked to keep the speed on fast. You've got two settings on the Leslie, a fast and slow for the rotation speed of the rotating parts of the device, and George used to keep it on fast, so I kept it on fast as well. You can adjust the slow speed and the fast speed in these parameters, and I've put the parameters, well, by comparing it to the original audio. I didn't touch the ramp time. I've left it on medium. It's the time the Leslie needs to start rotating, and I don't think you could adjust it on the original Leslie, so I left it on medium because, well, most probably George wouldn't have fiddled around it in 1970 when he recorded the solo. Okay, and the next parameter's drive is how hard you drive the amplifier, which is in the Leslie. And I turned them all the way up, because if you listen to the Let It Be single, George has got quite a fair amount of distortion on it. And yeah, so I think you need to turn the amplifier of the Leslie all the way up. I didn't touch the speaker blend. I fiddled around with it a little bit when building the sound, and I noticed that on the recording, both speakers, the horn and the woofer, are equally loud, so I left the speaker blend on equal. Of course, I set the mix to 100% because there's not really very much going on in the patch besides the Leslie. And yeah, I've left these untouched, level and headroom, so it doesn't distort. And if you just keep the Leslie like this, it's going to sound like this. It's near the sound, but it's not the sound George has. If you compare it with the Let It Be single, you notice quite a lot of things which are different to this sound. First of all, George has got much more overdrive on it. I don't know really how they did it. Maybe his guitar has got pickups with a higher output than mine. As I explained earlier in the video, the output of the Godin Icon convertible drops as you turn it into single coil mode. But George does have more overdrive, so I need more overdrive than the Leslie model in the Helix can give me. The second thing you notice is that the attack of George's string is much louder than the attack you've just heard on my string. This could have to do with playing technique, but I suspect that George Martin worked with compressors. So I've put a compressor in front of the whole thing. Firstly, to boost the signal a little bit, to have more overdrive from the preamp in the Leslie, and secondly, to work out the attack on the guitar some more. And I've set the threshold so the compressor just starts working on the signal, which I did by simply playing and fiddling around with this control. I set the ratio to 4:1, which is quite a bit compression, because I really want the transient from the pluck of a string, and then I want a nice clean sustain on it. And I've set up the attack quite high, which is the time the compressor needs to set in. And as we remember, compressor reduces dynamic peaks of the signal. So if I let it wait for like 119 milliseconds, it's not going to reduce the click, the sound which is produced when the pick hits the string, which is exactly the thing I'm aiming at. So I go for a higher attack time so that the still comes through. And well, the release, I've left it somewhere middle. It doesn't really play a big role in the whole thing. And as you see, I turned the level up for 3.3 dB so that I have more overdrive. And I've turned the level up successfully a little bit until it just hit the amount of overdrive which I heard on the recording George has played for the Let It Be single. Now let's hear what that sounds like. And now, well, the attack is there, the compression is there, but there are some frequencies which are very, very present in my sound, which George doesn't have, and there are other frequencies which are much more present in George's sound, which you can't really hear well on mine. So I worked with two equalizers to work them out. This is the first equalizer I put in this chain, although it comes second, but it just, well, I fiddle around with the whole thing and I tweaked, and well, never mind. This is the first thing I did. It doesn't really matter that it's second in the chain. What I did is, well, I've went around 3.8 kilohertz, and I boosted the signal there with a well, medium Q, because that's the frequency where you have the hiss of distortion. We've got all the fizz, all these cutting highs, which you might want on a lead guitar because it cuts better through the mix. And George Martin worked that out pretty well in the recording. So I gave this one a boost, and as we've heard in the example I've just played, there are not enough highs, which most probably has got to do that my guitar is made from mahogany, and a Fender Telecaster, which George used, isn't. So I have to compensate for the well, fewer high frequencies my guitar produces by boosting them also around 3.9 dB. On a quite high frequency, 6.3 kilohertz, which is about the highest frequency, which makes musical sense on a guitar. So I'm trying to compensate for the fact that I don't play a Telecaster. If you do, you might want to remove these boosts. All right, it sounds like that. Yeah, and now it comes quite near to George's sound. I think there are still some presence missing, and I think there's one frequency which really annoys me, which goes like ang, 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 ang. So I removed it with the second EQ. It's quite in the mids, it's in the low mids, 600 hertz. I measured that one out actually, and I took that down by 3.6 dB. So you have these annoying nasal mid-range frequency out of the signal. I still added some highs here because either I don't hear very well because I used a lot of loud tube amps in my time. Well, never mind. Maybe it's just the guitar. All right, so if you'd like add these two EQs in, it sounds like that. Okay, it sounds a little better if you like don't hit the mic stand with the playing end. All right, but never mind, this is just a demonstration. Okay, so yeah, this is the equalizing, and you see that it sounds more like the sound on the recording, which of course George Martin edited heavily in the production of the whole thing. One last ingredient I gave to it, well, these two I always add. It's a studio preamp and a studio compressor to make it more studio-like. We don't want a live sound here. We want decidedly a studio sound. What I did here is I put a reverb in parallel path. I always put reverbs and delays in parallel path because you can mix them in. Yeah, you split the signal here, and here it returns. You can mix it. You've got the A level, which is the dry signal. You've got the B level, which is the wet signal, and then you can adjust the B level to just the right amount of reverb or delay or whatever you put in the parallel path you want to have. The reverb I'm aiming for is the chamber reverb, and there's a specific reason I'm doing so, because the Beatles didn't have reverb units as we have nowadays. Every kind of reverb you are hearing on a Beatles record is a real reverb from a real room, and they used 4 recording chambers in the Abbey Road studios to produce the reverb, and it was recorded by microphones which were set up in the room, and you have a dedicated room signal in the Beatles. You don't have these reverb units which we nowadays use to create room in a recording. So I went for the chamber reverb of the Helix, and I've said, well, only a little decay because there's not much reverb on the Beatles records, on the later Beatles records, and I've put quite amount of pre-delay. Well, pre-delay is the time it takes for the first delays, which make up the reverb to hit your ears. And if you let some time pass before the first reverb signal reaches you, you have the impression that the signal is more upfront in a room. And that's what you want in a guitar solo. You want reverb, you want the room to it, you don't want it in your face, but you want the guitar to be in front of the other instruments as it plays a solo. So you need the pre-delay here. I've set the low cut and high cut to taste. I like the sound like that. And I always keep the mix at 50%. How loud the reverb is, I dial in at this section where you just can mix the dry and the wet signal. It's much more comfortable. I'd suggest you to do this as well if you use parallel paths. That is the complete sound you heard at the beginning of the video, and it sounds like this. Yeah, so this is a patch which I think comes close to George Harrison's sound on the Let It Be single. If you want to download the patch, you can find the address just below this video. And if you want to leave feedback, you're pretty welcome to. Just do so in the comments. Thank you very much for watching.